This really happened to me, and it changed the course of my life. I'm an older woman who spent 3 decades shipping projects in American tech, and this is the story of how a man told me I'd never be promoted, then watched me take his job. The hook began with a brushed steel coffee carafe sweating on the conference table in the Mont Rainier room of our South Lake Union office in Seattle. We were gathered there because the VP had called a pre-all-hands huddle, and my manager, Colin, leaned over the notepad I always brought, a navy moleskin, and said without blinking, "You'll never get a promotion here, Linda." He straightened the lanyard with his keycard, like he enjoyed neat lines, and finished, "Not with me around." The betrayal wasn't subtle. It was naked, tossed on the table between the carafe and my pen, while our colleagues checked Slack on their laptops. That was the moment I decided to press the cap on my pen and commit the scene to memory, because I knew one day I'd do something with it. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I was 56 when I joined Ardendale Systems, a mid-sized NASDAQ-listed SaaS company tucked between Dexter Avenue and Westlake in Seattle. If you've ever walked by the Amazon spheres on Lenora and seen a cluster of people in fleece vests clutching cold brew, you've brushed shoulders with our engineers. My husband, Mark, had already retired after 30 years with Boeing, and I had spent a few years caregiving for my mother in Spokane. When Mom passed, I came back to the city I love, took a contracting role at Ardendale, and then, after shipping a gnarly compliance automation we called Aurora, I came on full-time. My title? Senior Program Manager, Platform Operations. The first months were a return to rhythm, early fairy-like commutes along Elliott Bay, damp mornings, bacon and egg sandwiches from Biscuit Bitch near Pike Place Market when I needed something warm. It was good to feel needed again, to feel my calendar fill and my mind click into place over Gantt charts and dependency matrices. I mentored younger PMs, the ones who still thought a timeline could move when executives frowned hard enough. I remembered their names, their dogs' names, their favorite bubble tea. Then there was Colin Hart. He came to Ardendale from a cybersecurity startup in Austin, all sharp cheekbones and a grin like a ruler you could throw across a meeting. He wore Allbirds and a wedding ring he spun with his thumb when he lied. On day 2, he told me he ran the most complex piece of platform ops. And on day 3, he forwarded me a deck I had authored, stripped of my notes, with his name in the footer and a breezy TX to the VP. When I said, "Hey, I put this together," he replied in a Slack DM. "We're a team, Linda. Everyone wins." It was the first pebble in my shoe. Humiliation came in little stings he engineered. There was the time in the Smith Tower Observatory Lounge. Yes, the one with the old speakeasy vibe in Pioneer Square, when he clinked his glass and told a circle of engineers, "If we'd had the Aurora pilot last quarter, we'd have saved $1 million, but we didn't, because someone didn't get compliance to sign off." He looked at me over the rim of his drink. The circle followed his eyes. My body knew to smile before my mind did. But the truth was, I had the sign-off. Colin had delayed the meeting so he could present the pilot as his rescue 6 weeks later. The worst sting, though, was quiet. On a Tuesday in the King County Courthouse cafeteria on 3rd Avenue, where I'd gone to file a name change for a niece with my sister, Long story. I opened my email and saw a calendar invite titled Performance Calibration. That's HR language for the meetings where they decide who's high potential and who needs support. I wasn't invited to my own conversation, of course, but I noticed the participants: VP Meredith, HR business partner Danielle, and Colin. He had attached a document, Linda Q2 Assessment. It was marked confidential, but the preview pane showed the words scope slips and low initiative. The only scope we'd slipped was the one he moved without telling me. In the fluorescent light of the cafeteria, my sandwich tasted like paste. I don't spook easily. I was raised by a woman who ran a diner outside Spokane and never once miscounted a drawer. But in my 50s, after caregiving, after grief, I'd developed a patience that looks like passivity to the untrained eye. Patience is a kind of knife. It doesn't flash. It waits. I kept my face smooth in our next one-on-one while Colin explained that some people were hungry and some were legacy. He called me institutional knowledge, as if I were the old couch in a rental. Then he left me off the invite to a vendor due diligence call with a consultancy called Soundview Analytics, who happened to be run by his brother-in-law. The invoice would later show a no-bid scope 10 times the market rate. I began to pay a different kind of attention. In Looker, our dashboards showed that Aurora compliance tickets had been cold closed overnight and reassigned to his buddy, Dan. In Jira, change histories showed my estimates overwritten. Start dates quietly inched toward bad news bear territory. On Slack, I watched channel memberships like a hawk. It was funny who got added to Arch Aurora Execs Weekly and who didn't. When I asked for the deck that had gone to the CFO, I was told it was still in progress. Then discovered a PDF in my downloads with its metadata listing, author, Seahart. The deck's screenshots? Mine, down to the little post-it in the corner of my monitor that said, "Call Mom." There's a Washington state law that gives employees the right to review their personnel files. RCW 49.12.40. I mentioned it to Danielle in HR and asked, calmly, to see mine. I biked to the office that day instead of driving, rolled into the bike cage on Westlake, and took the elevator with a small tote containing a tidy folder of my own. Printed emails, a binder clip around a chronology of slights, and a list of names who'd seen what when. In the glass room, Danielle handed me a PDF printout with surprising speed. The speed, as any older woman learns, means that someone already prepared for the ask. There were observations about me, not owning outcomes, a line about struggling to build cross-functional buy-in, and a note about resistance to feedback. I read twice. Resistance to feedback, that old chestnut sliced across women over 40. I asked who wrote these observations. She said, "Your manager provided input." I said, "Is that the document attached to the calibration meeting?" She blinked, a slow blink. "That's confidential." The younger PMs told me to let it go. "Don't poke the bear," one said at Serious Pie on Virginia, over blistered crust and sausage. They were kind. They didn't want me burned. But every time I thought about letting it go, I tasted courthouse cafeteria air. And I remembered the coffee carafe and the lanyard and the ease with which he had said, "Not with me around." So I designed 3 small experiments. First, I created 2 versions of the Q3 strategy draft, identical except for a single pixel-sized dot I placed under the corner of slide 9, the one with the Aurora roadmap. In version A, the dot sat near a tile labeled Automated Audit Trail. In version B, it hid under Vendor Escalation Flow. I named one file Q3 Strategy New Year Draft V27LH Docs, and the other Q3 Strategy New Year Draft V28LH Docs. And I shared A to the official team folder while I accidentally dragged B into a 1.1 chat with Colin asking for feedback before I commit. Second, I put a single typo, just one, in the API name on the Automated Audit Trail slide. An extra underscore. It would compile fine in the docs, but fail a curl command if anyone typed it from the slide. Petty? Maybe? Useful? Absolutely. Third, I took a very old habit from my diner days. I dated every note in my moleskin and taped receipts behind the days when decisions were made. The paper trail was going to be physical, not just digital. Men like Colin are allergic to receipts they can't edit. 2 weeks later, at an internal review on floor 9 in a glassed-in room named Rain Shadow, someone projected a deck onto the wall. The slide 9 dot was visible to me the way a mother spots her kid in a crowd. It was B. The incorrect API name bloomed in 60-point font. Colin was on stage, laser pointer in hand, a red confetti dappling the word trail. He misspelled it while talking about clear ownership. Engineers squinted. One raised a hand. That curl command throws a 404. Colin chuckled and said, "This is conceptual." Engineers do not like conceptual curl commands. The meeting went sideways. People asked where the metrics were. He said, "Still in progress." The room could smell blood. Afterward, in the hallway by the big black and white photos of Seattle ferries, he cornered me. "What did you do?" "I put the right name in the official draft," I said, "and the wrong one in the draft for early feedback." "Drafts move fast," he said through his teeth. "You'll drown." On my walk home along the Myrtle Edwards Park path, ferries crossed the bay like quiet teeth. Mark made salmon. We opened a cheap rosé. The air smelled like wet sidewalk and dinners cooking in apartments above you. "You tired?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm awake." The next morning, a new calendar invite popped up. Its subject line: Employee Relations, Investigation. The organizer, HR. The attendees, me, Danielle, and someone from ER I didn't know. They wanted to ask me questions about creating a hostile environment for my manager by undermining his credibility. That's when I knew my little dot wasn't a pebble in my shoe anymore. It was a nail under his. He wanted it out. He wanted me out. But I didn't go to ER alone. I asked an old friend to meet me at the Starbucks Reserve Roastery on Pike Street, the one with the copper casks and the smell of roasting beans that makes your clothes remember. Her name was Evelyn Cho. She'd retired as general counsel at a public company in Bellevue, a woman who could read an SOW like it was sheet music. We sat at a high table, and she listened, saying only, "Uh-huh," and "Go on," while I walked her through the dot, the curl, the calibration dock, the no-bid to Soundview. She stirred her espresso and finally said, "They're trying to put you on a path to separation." She pointed with the spoon. But he made 2 mistakes. He put his fingerprints on artifacts that aren't his, and he tied his fate to a vendor relationship that won't withstand daylight. Daylight can be very bright when you open the right blinds. Evelyn taught me how to open them. "First," she said, "make a timeline. Not for them, for you. Emails, files, Slack messages, calendar entries, dinner receipts, commute logs, ticket histories. 2 copies, 1 digital, 1 paper." "Already started," I said, tapping my tote. "Second," she said, "stop sending drafts in Slack. version control in the official repo, and put your name on the metadata. Watermark if you must, and share artifacts with a distribution list curated to be unavoidable. Include legal ops, include security. Get their stamp in the logs. Done? Third, she said. Call the hotline. The what? Ardendale has an ethics hotline for the audit committee of the board. Anonymous if you want, but you'll want to leave enough breadcrumbs that the committee knows there's a real person with real receipts. Vendor conflict, retaliation indications, control circumvention. Use the right words. She handed me a napkin where she'd written phrases. Control weakness, segregation of duties, undisclosed related party transaction. Okay, I was awake. The ER meeting felt like a stage play with a bad script. Danielle smiled the way HR smiles when their hands are tied to some pre-written choreography. We've received reports, she began gently, that you are creating unnecessary friction and undermining your manager. The ER rep, Miles, was polite and curious in a way that felt careful. I listened. I took notes. Then I pushed a folder across the table. I will respond, I said, and I'd like this added to the record. Inside the folder was a digestible set of pages Evelyn had helped me prepare. Not 1,000 messages, just the right ones. The metadata of my slides, the Looker audit logs showing mass reassignment of tickets at 2:17 a.m., the procurement SOW with the SoundView signature block containing a familiar last name, the screenshot of the curl 404 under the wrong API name from the deck presented under his login credentials, the Slack message from him stating, "Don't worry about sending me the Aurora draft. I'll handle messaging," and a list of the people who had been in the rain shadow room, because witness lists matter, even if no one calls them witnesses. Miles read quietly. Danielle stopped smiling. He asked to keep the folder. I said, "I brought 2, one for you, one for legal." We sat with the soft hum of air vents and the clinking of mugs outside. He asked, "Have you made a report to the ethics hotline?" I held his eyes. "I will, after this meeting." He nodded, slow. "We'll be in touch." Afterward, I took the long way back to my desk, past the sunlit atrium where someone was demoing a VR headset, and a dog in a bandana was being petted by an intern. You see odd things on the day you choose to fight for yourself. For lunch, I ate clam chowder at Pike Place Chowder, sitting alone near a couple from Ohio, arguing about where to park in Ballard. Then I went back to the office and opened my email. There was a message from CFO's office. Request for additional context. Aurora vendor selection. Our CFO, a man who wore suits even on Fridays in Seattle, had been CC'd on the deck with the wrong curl command, apparently, and he wanted to understand why SoundView had a no bid. I clicked into the procurement system. The supporting documents had been uploaded at 1:03 a.m. by DeHart, with a note, urgent for Q3. The justification said, sole source due to unique expertise. I knew a handful of firms in Seattle doing the same work for a third the cost. I wrote a short note. Happy to provide context. There were alternatives. At 4:57 p.m., while the sky turned that ash blue that means darkness is coming quickly, I got the ethics hotline confirmation email. My report was logged, assigned to Audit Committee Intake. I disclosed my identity because I wasn't hiding. I was telling. I'd used Evelyn's words. I had listed dates and amounts and the exact quote where Colin told me, in a real room with a carafe sweating on the table, that he would block my promotion. The report included a line I loved. I am willing to sit down with anyone and show my notes. The war didn't start that night. It started the next morning at 9:02 a.m. when calendar invites began to multiply. Audit team inquiry. Procurement review. ER follow-up. One subject line chilled me. Proposed performance improvement plan. If you've worked long enough, you know the acronym, and you know what it's supposed to do. Make you leave on your own so no one has to push you. I printed it. I wrote today's date on it. Then I walked down to the lobby, pushed through heavy glass doors, and stood in the October air watching a bus turn onto Denny. A stranger's dog looked at me, head tilted. I took a breath that filled my whole chest. When I went back upstairs, I didn't go to my desk. I went straight to floor 10, to the glass door that says legal. I asked to see someone about a vendor conflict of interest. The receptionist asked me to wait. I stood by a framed photo of the Seattle skyline at dusk. A woman in a navy blazer came to get me. "I'm Alana," she said, "Associate General Counsel." We shook hands. In a small conference room, she closed the door and said, "We received an audit notice from the board this morning. I'm triaging. Tell me everything." I did, slowly, the kind of slow that arrives as a gift for women who have lived long enough to speak without apology. She asked smart questions about the procurement process, the SOW, the dual logins in the audit logs for Looker. She wrote notes. "We're going to need to preserve a lot," she said. "Do you have any concerns about retaliation?" I laughed in a way that wasn't pretty. "I'm already holding a PIP draft." She didn't smile. "I'll escalate," she said, "and I'll ask for a hold on any disciplinary action pending review." She paused. "You did the right thing." That night, I barely slept. The rain hit the windows like someone tapping to get in. Mark made ginger tea. He held my hand while I stared at the TV showing muted baseball in some other city under other lights. I wrote in my moleskin, "Even when they say no, there is a path." Then I wrote the date and the names of the meetings tomorrow. At the bottom of the page, I wrote a single word: daylight. At 8 a.m., the CFO's office canceled the vendor meeting. 10 minutes later, he rescheduled it as executive session, audit chair joining. The kind of phrase that makes a building hold its breath. At 9:15, my ER follow-up changed attendees so that Miles became Miles plus external counsel. At 10:30, a group message from VP Meredith asked me to prepare a concise overview of Aurora decision milestones. She CC'd legal. She CC'd no one else. Colin pinged me on Slack. "We should align on message." I typed, "Please route through legal. I'll speak to them first." He replied with a thumbs up emoji. The tiniest crack is still a crack. I didn't get to the afternoon all hands about OKR resets. I was booked elsewhere, in the boardroom on floor 11, with frosted glass, a bowl of green apples, and a view over Lake Union, where seaplanes lift like dragonflies off water. The audit chair was there, a woman with silver hair and a blouse patterned like tiny compass roses. She asked me to walk the room through the timeline. I didn't try to impress. I told them dates. I told them where the documents lived and who accessed them when. I told them where the dot was and which version had it. I said the phrase, "related party transaction," and watched three heads lift. I showed one screenshot. The SOW with the last name heart in the signature block for Soundview. The room was very quiet. "Thank you," the chair said. "We'll take it from here." But I wasn't finished. I had one more note in my tote, the one I'd kept aside, like a spare key. It was a forwarded email from a Gmail account to a private Proton Mail address I didn't recognize. Where Colin had cut and pasted a paragraph, I wrote to a customer about how the Aurora audit trail would satisfy SOC2 control CC6 specs and had called it sales copy. He'd sent it to someone else and asked, "Can you put this in our case study?" The Proton address matched a contractor he'd later propose hiring. I handed it across the table to legal. "In case you want it," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "Daylight," I added, to no one and everyone. At 4:01 p.m., my email pinged with 3 things at once. The ER meeting canceled until further notice, the PIP draft on hold, and a new meeting for executive follow-up. The building felt like it had shifted, like when a ferry turns and you feel a sway before you see the wake. I walked down Lenora toward 8th and watched a couple in matching beanies laugh under one umbrella. It rained on the umbrella, and it rained on me, and I felt the smallest, wildest thing, relief's pilot light catching. Then, at 7:13 p.m., while I was washing dishes, my phone buzzed and showed a preview I will never forget. "Welcome, Director of Platform Operations." My mouth dried out. The sender's name was Office of the CEO. For 1 second, I thought it was a mistake. Then I thought it was a trap. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the email. It began with, "Effective Monday, you will step in as Interim Director of Platform Operations, reporting directly to VP Meredith, with the Platform Ops team transitioning under your leadership. This follows a leadership change we will announce tomorrow." There was a formal paragraph about compensation and a note that, "We're grateful for your courage in raising concerns." The signature block held the CEO's name, the general counsel's, and Meredith's. I never heard the dish I was holding clink into the sink. I breathed once and then again, and in the space between breaths, a tiny, mean thought slid in. He said I'd never be promoted with me around. So where are you, Colin? I slept well that night for the first time in weeks, but there are always aftershocks, and mine arrived the next morning at 5:42 a.m. while the sky was still a dull bruise over the Sound. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Check your email." I opened my corporate inbox and found a message that had been BCC'd to me by accident. Or not by accident, I never learned. It was from Colin, sent at 2:11 a.m., addressed to 3 clients and 2 internal execs not on our chain. It said, "There have been allegations from a disgruntled older employee whose projects were failing. Please disregard any audit noise. Our team is solid. Older, disgruntled, projects failing." My heart beat hard in my throat. I forwarded the email to legal with 2 words. "Retaliation attempt." Then I put on my coat, kissed Mark's cheek, and drove to the office through a city that felt new because I was walking into it with a different spine. When you take a man's cover away, he thrashes. He clutches paperwork and hurls adjectives. He calls you emotional. He calls you legacy. He calls you disgruntled. But Daylight is unbothered by adjectives. It wants calendars and logs, contracts, and author fields. When I walked into the executive floor that morning, the mood was not interested in how anyone felt about me. It was interested in facts. Legal had already looped in the CEO. The CEO, a man whose running shoes squeaked when he paced, had already looped in the audit chair. The audit chair had already looped in an external firm whose people wear serene expressions and hold iPads like shields. Colin was not in the building. His badge had stopped working, as a friend in security put it, with a sympathetic look you only get after many years of issuing temporary day passes to people who forgot theirs until the day when a badge actually can't open a door anymore. Before the formal announcement, I had to do something both small and enormous: meet the team I would lead. They were gathered in a glass meeting space called Skagit, eyes wide, laptops open, mugs with little steam lines above them. They were the same faces who had watched a curl command fail and made mental notes. They were the same faces that had once looked to the side of the room where Colin stood to see how to react. Now they looked at me. "I won't waste your time with speeches," I said. I asked for daylight, and we got it. We're going to do 3 things. 1, we're going to finish Aurora and ship it right. 2, we're going to set up real vendor oversight and never again have a no bid because someone wants to hire their brother-in-law. 3, we're going to rebuild trust by telling the truth in our decks and showing our work. If you have concerns, bring them to me. If you have receipts, bring those too. I smiled because I could. Also, we're not changing the API name again. They laughed a little. Someone exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for a year. Then came the formal, at 10:00 a.m., all hands where the CEO spoke in controlled sentences about leadership transitions and gratitude for contributions. He didn't say Colin's name. He didn't have to. The chat scrolled with, "And welcome, Linda," and a few carefully neutral thank yous. I didn't read too much into it. People show you who they are slowly. I watched the ones who sent me, privately, little, "If you ever need a witness" messages. I saved them. We shipped Aurora. We tore up Soundview's SOW and ran a real RFP with 3 firms from Seattle and Portland. The winner charged a third of the price and delivered twice as fast. I met with the CFO every 2 weeks for a quarter to review control fixes. We instituted a documented change log with Slackbot confirmations and required every file that hit the exec folder to pull metadata into the footer like a serial number tattoo. We added 2 women in their 40s to the team, one returning from a break, one a career changer from finance. I told them both, "Your patience will be called passivity. It isn't. It's a knife." Colin tried once more. His lawyer sent a letter claiming age bias against him for my benefit, and defamation by implication. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. Legal handled it. They asked me for my notes a final time. I handed over the tote. A month later, we settled in a conference room on the 26th floor of a building on 2nd Avenue, near where the valet at the Arctic Club Hotel spins umbrellas for guests when it rains. The terms are confidential, as these things go. But here's what I can tell you. Control weaknesses got patched, audit closed with a clean report, and a man's smirk doesn't look good under a fluorescent light. He can't switch off. One evening in late November, I stood on the steps outside King County Superior Court after a mediation session wrapped at dusk. The sky was cobalt, streaked with cold front. I watched a man in a suit hustle into a rideshare while glancing over his shoulder. Then I walked toward Yesler Way and bought a cup of hot cider from a cart I hadn't noticed before. When you're older, victories feel less like fanfare and more like a room's air-changing temperature. A car passed, playing music low enough to be felt more than heard. I thought of the coffee carafe in Mont Rainier, and I imagined it sweating under a different hand now. Mine? That should have been the end. It wasn't. On the Sunday night before my official first day as director, interim had been removed by then, lightly, as if it had been a typo from the start. There was a knock on our apartment door near Belltown. I looked through the peephole and saw no one. On the mat, an unmarked padded envelope. I brought it inside, put it on the kitchen island, and stared at it like you stare at a letter you've been waiting for but don't want to open. Mark looked up from the crossword. "Want me to?" "No," I said. "I want to." Inside was a USB drive. No note. Just the cheap thumb of plastic and metal that never means anything good in movies or life. I didn't plug it into my laptop. I bagged it in a Ziploc, wrote the date on the plastic with a Sharpie, and texted Alana from legal. Received anonymous USB at home. She wrote back faster than I could have imagined on a Sunday. "Do not insert, bring to security." I put it in my tote and hung the tote by the door. That hanging bag felt like a bell that wanted to ring all night. In the morning, I took the USB to security, like it was a relic that could burn holes in desks. They imaged it in a lab on floor 6 and called legal. The files were a slop of Slack exports, screenshots, and a folder labeled Succession Plan, because the arrogant love to name things like villains in quiet novels. The plan wasn't mine. It was a document linking several people, including a VP in a different org, to conversations about consolidating ops under a new leader if legacy PMs failed to deliver Aurora. My name was in it as an obstacle. There was also a PDF of a draft reference letter for Colin from someone who had sat in the rain shadow room. The PDF was dated before the all-hands where the curl command failed. "Anonymous source?" I asked Alana. She shrugged. "Sometimes the daylight has fans." The company did a second sweep. This time, they were surgical. People whose names had lived on my screen politely in Slack for months found themselves in small rooms with frosted glass and cups of water they held but did not drink. Some weren't fired. Some were moved. Conflicts were disclosed and taken seriously. The executive who wrote the draft letter retired to pursue other interests. We brought in 2 ethics trainers who were ex-prosecutors. One of them had a voice like gravel in hot water and told a room of 27 technologists, "You can be clever or you can be ethical. Only one keeps you employed." I was busy, just good, ordinary busy. We ran an incident response drill the way firefighters run lines, hands on hoses, not just talking about water. We shipped Aurora 1.0 to our Chicago customer, and I flew there and sat in a conference room in the Loop, where the windows reflected elevated trains, and the coffee tasted like ambition. I ate a hot dog at Portillo's with an engineer who had never been to Chicago. We looked at the river and said nothing for a minute because sometimes that's the right number of words. In Seattle, I had a new habit, walking to Cary Park on Queen Anne at dawn before big days. On the mornings when fog wrapped the Space Needle like gauze, I'd stand with my gloved hands in my coat pockets and feel the city vibrate like a tuning fork. I'd think about Mom ladling soup, about women who read through their own HR files in fluorescent cafeterias and decide to sharpen their patience instead of dull their pride. I'd think about the little pixel-sized dot beneath a tile on slide 9. A life is shaped by tiny dots as much as it is by big applause. People ask if I felt bad when the email arrived saying, "Welcome, Director of Platform Operations." They want to know if victory tastes bitter when it's been marinated in humiliation. I tell them I felt steady, Not triumphant, not smug, just steady, like a boat that finally found the right heading and the right weather after a long time battling a crosswind. I tell them I made a pot of chili that night, and we ate it with cheddar and onions, and we watched the fairy lights Bob and I wrote, promoted in my moleskin, and underlined it once. A month later, I went to lunch alone at Canlis because I had promised myself, years ago, that I would go there when something good and improbable happened to me. The hostess treated me like my name meant something before it did. I sat by the window and watched the water. The bread arrived warm and said everything good bread says. The server asked if I was celebrating. I told him yes, and I told him no one had given it to me. He smiled, the kind of smile you earn. When the dessert came, a tiny candle flickered and made a circle of light on the plate, like a stage in miniature. I blew it out and kept the moment to myself. There's a piece of this story I haven't told yet, and maybe it's the most important one. After I became director, I had the power to erase. I could have rewritten decks, reauthored code, changed names on tickets. I could have made it look like I'd been there holding the baton at the front of every parade. Instead, I added names. I sent notes to the people who had done quiet work in loud rooms and put them on slides. I wrote, in big, bold fonts, built by Erica, Samir, Jules. I said, I learned this from Rosa, and this wasn't my idea. This was Aisha's. The thing I'd wanted more than a promotion, maybe, was to be the kind of director who didn't need to tidy the world until it erases everyone but me. I keep the PIP draft in the bottom of my desk drawer at home. Not as a talisman, as a receipt. On difficult days, when someone sends an email in all caps, or a vendor forgets a meeting, or an executive wants to boil a month into an hour, I take the PIP out, look at the date on top, and say, gently, to no one. Even when they say no, there is a path. Not long ago, I ran into Danielle from HR at the farmer's market on Capitol Hill. She was off duty, hair down, pushing a stroller. She smiled with her whole face. "How are you, Director?" she teased, and we both laughed. Then her smile softened. "I'm sorry I didn't. You know." I shook my head. "You did," I said. "You kept the record straight when it mattered." She squeezed my forearm in that unself-conscious way women touch each other when language gets in the way of the sigh they really want to share. I don't know where Colin went. Someone said Austin. Someone said a startup that would have loved to hire someone with solid enterprise experience. Maybe a different building now has his smirk in it. Maybe a different coffee carafe sweats under a different lanyard. That's not my problem. My job is daylight. My job is the dot you can't see from the middle of the room, but that tells you later who did what and when and why. Last week, a young PM knocked on my office door. Yes, a real door, not a virtual one, and asked if I had 5 minutes. She sat down, wrung her hands, and said, "My manager told me I'm not director material." She winced like saying it out loud would get me in trouble. I asked her where she was when he said it. "Conf room," she said, "in front of the team." I nodded. "Was there a physical object on the table?" She looked confused. "A carafe or a pen?" She said, "A pen. He tapped it." I smiled without feeling like I had to. "Write that down," I said. "Write the brand of the pen if you can remember it. Then we'll build your daylight." She blinked tears up and blinked them down. Then she laughed, that plural laugh women have when the joke's on the world for underestimating them. We opened a blank doc together. I typed the date for her. I typed her name. I typed daylight log. I handed her the keyboard. She looked like someone who'd been given a map and a light. She looked like a person who might, one day, sit where I sit and open a window while the room holds its breath. And then, because life is a cheeky writer, my email pinged. Subject line, Welcome, Director of Infrastructure, Chicago. It wasn't for me. It was for Erica, the engineer whose name I'd put in big, bold letters 2 months prior. I forwarded it to her with a single line. I told you they'd notice. She came by my door with eyes that were all astonishment. I didn't even think, she began. You did the work, I said. You made the curl command sing. When people ask me what revenge feels like, I say it feels like a clean room, air scrubbed, walls white, people speaking honestly. It feels like a fog lifting off Elliott Bay and the Space Needle shrugging out of its gauze. It feels like a coffee carafe that's just a coffee carafe again and not a weapon. It feels like daylight at your back while you walk into a building that once shrank you and now fits. It was real. It happened to me. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the tiny click of a pixel-sized dot telling the truth under the weight of 1,000 eyes. The end.